Okay, well, thank you. Yes, as you alluded, I am an executive board member with the Shoreline Youth Football Conference. The Shoreline Youth Football Conference is an organization of 19 organizations or 26 towns throughout the state of Connecticut. I've been involved, as you said, for over 11 years coaching various sports, including football. The concussion portion really came about, actually for me, with Shoreline about 6 years ago. My own son had a concussion playing football. He was actually life-scarred from the field on that and suffered severe long-term effects that still dealing with today. So it was kind of a hit home, and so we started looking at a lot of what was going on in our sport, what was causing it, and within our conference, and what we can do to change it. It was very difficult. Just a little background on the Shoreline Youth Conference. With those 26 towns, there's 5 grade levels, or I should say within those 19 organizations, there's 5 grade levels. So you're talking, for teams, you're talking over 2,000 players for just the Shoreline Youth Football Conference. We have over 400 coaches overall that are coaching, over 150 head coaches. So a lot of things we had looked at, what are we teaching our coaches to teach the players? How do we educate the coaches to recognize signs and symptoms of all injuries, including concussions? We ended up partnering with American Youth Football, which is a large organization throughout the country that oversees many different youth football organizations from the Pop Warner to the Federation high school level. We also looked at USA Football, which is a partner of the USA Hockey. We currently looked at, 2 years ago, a new program that USA Football came out with, which is called the Heads Up Football Training. It's been endorsed by CDC, been endorsed by the NFL, and so on and so forth. With that training, all our coaches were required to do it, all 400. But the way it's set up is each organization, or as a conference, you train a player safety coach. That's what they call it, PSC. And doing that, they would take that training, become a trainer, and then bring it down to each organization level. And then that organization would train their own coaches. So it's kind of a trickle-down effect in terms of the training. Much like Tom had alluded to, very difficult. It's all volunteer. And how do we get them to be able to take all this training? Wasn't easy. There we had pushback, had hesitation, but in the end, every one of them stepped up to do it because they're there for the kids. They started to realize when we started looking at our own statistics, what do we need to do differently? With football, it's inherent. There's an old football saying from when I played in regards to concussions, well, you got your belt on and you're always put back in. All those phrases in the manner in which we teach all had to be changed in order to align ourselves to make it a safer game, because it is an enjoyable game. It is a team sport as long as there's some safety factors in it. And there is risk to playing that. There is no, as I believe you alluded to last meeting, there is no equipment that's concussion proof. There's no helmet. There's no mouth guard. But there are techniques that can be trained to avoid concussions, specifically like with the Heads Up Football program. It's a different way of tackling, and you're starting to see it on a professional level because they're teaching that trickle down all the way down to the youth level. 2 years ago, we started mandating our organizations or requesting that they take the concussion module from the CIAC. I had spoken with them, and they kind of tailored their current program that they use for the high school, tried to get it a little more youth 2 years ago, so that we can kind of apply it to our organization. Last year was the first year every head coach was required to have that module. The reason we chose the CIAC, it's the only certified concussion training for state Connecticut that's recognized. Where there's so many programs, USA Football does it, American Youth Football has all kinds of concussion awareness. But we felt that every head coach needed that added ability. We looked at it as the head coaches, they're second to the parent. They know those kids players, they know their reactions, they know how they respond, especially in that environment. They would recognize something that was off with a child after a head. They know the heads, even the slightest heads, and you always hear about the big head, a hard hammered head. That's not always necessarily the case. The smallest head, the slightest different reaction, the coaches are trained to recognize that through that CIAC module. All the coaches in our conference, not just with football and cheerleading, are all required to have coaching certification through USA Football. We made it required because it gives them the knowledge, and not just concussion awareness, it gives them the education of hydration, as that's a big component, especially in the beginning months of football. It gives them the awareness and gives them the techniques so that they're all on the same page. The way we monitor that is we do what's called a book certification. Every team has to be certified before they can step on the field. That all the emergency information is done, and that all the coaches are certified. They have to present that. We took the initiative as a conference and set up several different training nights through CIAC and had them come down to us. Because we looked at it as a cost-benefit analysis, because there is a cost in the training. Bringing the CIAC down for us was a lot cheaper, and as an organization, I could do 90 coaches at a time. So that's how we looked at it. CIAC did recently come out with an online training for that, but I had several coaches do both the online and in-person, and they get more out of it through the in-person than the online. So we made it required as being any coach, any head coach has to go through the in-person as opposed to the online. But we pick up the cost of it. I think there was a question about how we train the parents. Well, the USA Football, the Heads Up program, actually has a component with that we adopted into our organization of training the parents. Every town or every team is required to hold specifically a parent meeting where they go over the all the aspects of the team, the safety factor, the hydration, and the concussion. And we hand out certain items for them to recognize if their child has been hit or is suffering some minor effects of concussions, what to recognize. We tell in those meetings, because as he alluded to, the biggest pushback that we have is parents on the sideline. We tell the parents right off the bat, coach has the ultimate say. with, in regards to whether the child plays due to injury or not. We put that into the coach's hands specifically because they, in the concept of playing the game, they know the player the best and how they're going to react on the field. We even put that above the parent because the parent's not there on the sideline, not there at practice on the sideline working with the child. So we put the head coach is ultimately responsible to make that call. And again, it wasn't easy. We were talking of history of doing it a certain way to change that mentality, to change the mentality of competitiveness to teaching. But we honestly, we had pushback, but we had nobody leave because of it. And so that's essentially what our association is doing currently.
Any questions for Jim? Karen?
So, I'm sorry, what age group are your athletes?
Our age group starts from about age 8. Actually starts at age 7 with we call it a 4th grade team. It's all grade based, and our specific is there is no weight limit. It's only specifically by grade. And no, in other football leagues like the Connecticut Youth Football League, it's more of a Pop Warner where it's weight restricted. We looked at it as, in looking at the data, versus weight restricted and no weights, is that children of same grade, same mind level, regardless of how big or how small they are, play relatively the same in terms of their, what they're thinking about and how to hit and how to make a tackle. When you look at the weight restriction, you could potentially take a 4th, or I should say a 5th or 6th grade student playing on a 7th or 8th grade level. We thought that was more dangerous, even if the 7th or 8th grade level child is smaller than the younger. They have a better understanding of how to hit and can actually do more damage. And we looked at the statistics to show that.
Thanks. So, one of the problems I see as a pediatrician seeing the kids who are playing is that they don't really recognize that they've been injured.
Right.
So they can take a hit and have headache or dizziness or whatever, and they keep playing. So not every injury is observed by the coach, or if it's observed, not every injury is recognized as maybe being significant. And especially the younger kids, again, don't have that knowledge to report it. So some of the more severe injuries we see are kids who've had, one significant hit and then continue to play and get these just repetitive, subconcussive blows, and they have a much more, protracted recovery. So I guess that goes back to the question, what are we doing to really educate the kids as well?
And that's difficult.
To report their symptoms, yeah.
That's very difficult, especially in the grade level that we're talking about, from grade 4 through 8. They sometimes don't have the capacity or understanding, geez, my headache is coming from the head, not my helmet. For the coaches, that's a difficult portion too, especially for a first-year player. Typically, when I go to the different ones, a lot of the complaints I get, I got a headache, and the child hasn't even been out hitting it at that point, is because of the helmet and not used to the equipment that they're wearing, which can mask a lot of the signs. Very difficult that we're finding, and we're still trying to develop ways of educating our coaches to see past that, to see the reactions, and to educate. We constantly tell the players that if anything just does not feel right, to tell your coach. It hasn't been easy. It all starts with the coach and understanding that it's a teaching, not a competitive sport. at that level.
So Karen? I have a question for you. So are you, just to fine tune this a little bit, from the pediatric standpoint, are you saying, or are you suggesting, or are you thinking that that there's something about that age group where self-awareness doesn't exist in the form in which either education would be helpful or stick, or do you think it's more of an interactional issue?
Well,
You can teach, my point being, you can teach all day, but if you're teaching in a language that doesn't mean anything, because the understanding at that level is they're unprepared to understand the meaning of what's being said, the import. Could you just talk to that?
Sure. In my experience, I think children that age can certainly be taught to report certain symptoms. I think it's, when I see them after an injury and we talk about, what they felt out on the field, and that's not something they felt before. And if they, if they knew what to call it and that type of body blow or falling down the ground or, head-to-head impact, whatever it was, trigger those symptoms, would they be able to, report something like that? I think they would. So I don't think we've really given it a good enough try to educate kids, about the injury, to say that it's not going to work or they're too young to be aware. I think that effort should be made, and it seems to me that it's a common theme, with almost any youth sport organization, that we can't leave the athletes out of the education. That we should also have a means of educating them. And if you look at other state models, they do have online training programs for children. That's, so I think it can be done, and it's worth a try. So for a child to report, after they slipped on the ice and hit their head on the ice playing hockey, that they were dizzy afterwards and had trouble skating, or skating their normal way, to know that was significant, to let their coach know, I think would be valuable.
And how do you feel about the concept of the buddy system, the peer supervision?
The buddy system works great. I've seen it work very, very well, where a teammate will go over to the coach and say, hey, Joey over there he's not himself.
There's something explodes.
James, I'm wondering, same question that Professor Mayashita asked beforehand. Do you guys have medical personnel on the sidelines for your games?
What we do is, but in the context of an emergency situation only. As a conference, we require a minimum of an EMT to be on the sidelines, emergency medical technician. But you also have to look at what they're there for. They're not there to necessarily come running on the field when a player goes down. They're there when the coach's knowledge of what they've received is not sufficient, that they feel that there is more of a problem than the coach can handle. It's good and bad, because as an EMT myself, I have certain regulations that I can do and cannot do. So being on the sideline, I can't just go up and start evaluating a child, because now I've got certain regulations of I've initiated patient care. I must transport unless I get parents' refusal. We would love to have, and we constantly debate this every time we meet. We'd love to have trainers, sports trainers, but there's a cost. Some towns just have a hard time just affording to have an EMT on the sideline for every game. So I would say officially, yes, we have, but not only if the coaches feel that it's warranted.
I have a question for you. Two questions. One is, do you favor team certification, individual certification, league certification? Which one would be the best?
Oh, individual certification is the best. In terms of the coaches, you mean, or the organization? individual certification because we found that they get more out of it, they get more understanding out of the training.
And one last question. While you were speaking, the word that was going through my head was wellness. So are you aware of any programs or states in which we are, after all, sort of the insurance state? Any insurance company-related initiatives in which these programs and training would be funded by insurers who have promoted themselves as the champions of wellness?
I'm only familiar with the current one that we use. The American Youth Football does have in the support of Sadler Insurance so that they do give reductions. A lot of their training we can get free, sponsored by them, because it just helps their benefit, and because they insure our entire league.
Sorry, Mark. So I just wanted to ask real quick. So besides observing the symptom of the injury and asking for symptoms, what else have your youth coaches been trained to do in terms of an evaluation?
Oh, we follow the full, our recommendation to our coaches, we follow the full CIAC concussion protocol, return to play protocol that they've adopted for the high schools. If they have any doubt something's wrong, they sit and they're not allowed back until they're seen by a doctor and have been cleared by a doctor.
I guess I don't know what that means, the CIAC protocol. So we're talking about the kid is injured, the coach sees it.
Yep.
What does he do on the sideline?
Oh, okay. I see where you're going. He goes through a set of questions similar to USA Hockey does, not to the extent that they have, but they have a little card that they'll go through, ask certain questions to see their cognitive response to them.
So no eyes or balance? No examination of balance or eyes?
No.
James, just as a point of follow-up for Dr. Longo's point and as a point of clarification for something you said earlier, as an EMT, were you describing a situation in which a coach has to determine that their training isn't sufficient to make a determination of what's happening or sufficient to cover a particular injury for you to then be able to come onto the field?
In a way. Our coaches are trained, with CPR, first aid. They're trained, to recognize, certain types of injury. When I say, it's up to them to decide, does this child need to be seen by a medical professional? That's where that line is drawn. So that, especially in the younger grades, in the grade 4 range, when a player is out on the field, we tend to see players go down from tackle and complain of like a bruise. So it's trying to determine, is there a significant injury, or is something that a player would get playing on a playground. So that once they determine, yes, okay, for an example, player has a severe pain on his arm that's beyond not getting better after monitoring, they would call the EMT over to address that, and the EMT would address the symptoms and transport to a medical facility.
The EMT issue covers all your games, even your 4th grade games, you have EMT?
Yes.
And is that person reimbursed for their time?
Yes, each town is responsible during the regular season to have an EMT on the scene. A lot of them, such as my group, pay them like $50 per game. It's up to the primary service holder for the medical services of that town to decide what can be charged.
And I'm sorry, just one more point of clarification, James. I know you're wearing two hats,
Yes.
but in your training as a coach, do you find that your training helps eliminate any level of subjectivity that you may experience in determining whether or not an athlete needs more attention from a medical professional?
I would say my direct answer would be yes, it does. It's hard. I've had to try to separate myself between the two. As a coach, I get to know my players. I get to know them, know their habits, know how they would react, as their training goes with football, how they're going to handle the hits, stuff like that. I can see the difference, and I get this from the other coaches in the conference, are afraid to, they want to call the EMT immediately, because they're afraid. Which I say to them, and I tell them, I say, if you have any doubt, call them. They have the next level of medical training, be it at the basic, and use that knowledge. They're getting more comfortable as they're going through the training, the concussion training, and getting the knowledge themselves, so that they can, specifically with concussions, they can recognize the signs a little more clearly, as opposed to before. I do see in our conference, I've seen this year a lot more requests for the EMT to come out based on hits, helmet hits, head hits, because that's such a sensitive topic with concussions.
Okay, we're going to move on. James is going to be here at all our meetings, so we'll catch him before, after, and during.
Yes.
Thanks a lot, James. So we're going to move on. Our next